They said, you will start a war. I'm not going to start a war. I'm going to stop wars.
Man who police believe shot and killed United Healthcare CEO.
I think that it's respectful to come to the Oval Office of the United States of America.
I always say tariffs is the most beautiful word to me in the dictionary.
The U.S. military carried out massive precision strikes on the 3 key nuclear facilities in the Iranian regime.
And then Daddy has to sometimes use strong language to
Yeah,
get stuff.
strong language. Glorious new peace.
Morocco to Madagascar to Nepal, members of Gen Z are taking to the streets.
The Global Samud Flotilla was the biggest ever attempt to break Israel's illegal and inhumane siege.
Thank you, comrades. Welcome to the Revolution Festival and welcome to A World on Fire. We live in a time of deep crisis, and I would say you don't have to be an expert in politics or history to realize that there is something profoundly wrong in our society. There is something sick that sits at the core, and there are no signs that it's about to get any better. I think this is being expressed all around us. You see it on social media. You can see it in art. You can see it in the films that come out of Hollywood. But we also see it and hear it in our day-to-day conversations. Whether it shows up as pessimism, anxiety, or anger, there's a feeling that a lot of people can't quite name, but all of us can recognize. Whatever it is, I think people would agree that there is something in the air. After World War I, the famous phrase, "the world is on fire," was coined by Woodrow Wilson. This was a time when the Bolsheviks had taken power, the German workers had brought an end to the Great Slaughter, and it was in that context that the rulers of the old capitalist order were terrified that revolution would spread. It would spread and it would come to their shores. The old phrase, "a spectre is haunting Europe," was alive again, and it felt like a real threat that needed to be reckoned with. But that was for the ruling class. Of course, for the masses and the working class all around the world, it felt different. They were inspired, and communists at that time all over the world were trying to study and understand these huge events that were taking place. We have the same job today. We have the same job this weekend. The ruling class thought, in the recent period perhaps, from the 90s onwards, that the days of revolution, certainly the days of communism, were far from over. Well, I think if they took a look at this room, it would definitely give them a fright. But it's not just us. Anyone can look around the world today and see that this mood of anger at the ruling class is growing, and it shows no signs of stopping. Last summer, we saw the incredible movements that led to the downfall of regimes. We saw the downfall of the regime in Bangladesh. We saw the youth rise up in Kenya in what was called the Gen Z revolution. And we took a lot of time as the Revolutionary Communist International to analyze it, to discuss it, and uplift it in the West, say, look at what is taking place on the other side of the world. And now this year, we have seen a continuation, a magnification of that process, of the Gen Z revolution. Except, arguably, now it's bigger, it's faster, and it's quicker. And it's spreading at a pace that makes it very difficult to keep up with and analyze and write the appropriate amount of articles about. I think when we look around the world today, we can see that the world is on fire once again. Revolutions are erupting, and they are led by the youth. And these revolutions are against corruption, against poverty, and against, specifically, the horrors of imperialism. This is forging a new generation, and this is a generation that we must base ourselves on, a generation that is ready to take the system on in any way they can. The ruling class are terrified to confront this mood and even to talk about it or pay enough attention to it. Actually, if you were to focus on what the media, what the bourgeois media tells us about the world, you would be very miserable. There would be very little hope to be had. What do we see in the media every single day? The rise of right-wing populists and right-wing populism, spewing racism and division every single day, the crackdown on democratic rights in all of its forms, and of course, the genocide in Gaza, war all over the world, and imperialism, which is tearing apart country after country. But the point of this weekend is to show you that this is not the only process that is taking place in society. Actually, what we can see is that there is a polarization in society, in large because of all of these events that are taking place all over the world. And this polarization is looking for an expression in many different forms. Above all, there is a radicalization of the youth. And that is where we come in, to offer a communist perspective on the movements that are shaking the world and draw out what that means for us as revolutionaries in Britain. It is in that context that we are having the biggest revolution festival we have ever had. And part of that includes our biggest ever international delegation with, I think, nearly 200 comrades who have come from all over the world. So we're going to welcome you all especially, and when I say your country, just give us a wave so we can know where you are. So we have comrades from Austria. We have comrades from Belgium. Yes? Yes! Thank you. We have a comrade from Brazil, which we're very happy about. We have comrades from Canada, from Denmark, way too many from Denmark. We have comrades from France, from Germany, hello, from Hungary, from Ireland, from Italy, I think we waved at you earlier, Latvia, Lithuania, Poland, Portugal, Spain, Spanish state, there you go, Sweden, Switzerland, the USA. Woo! Excellent. Did I miss anyone? Yugoslavia! Woo! Sorry. I think it's appropriate that we have such a huge international delegation this year because of the importance of world perspectives. And obviously that is what we are going, thank you for the flag. Obviously that is what we are going to continue to discuss tonight. That's what the video that we showed was trying to give you a glimpse of, what is happening all around the world. And I think that every month it feels as though these so-called once-in-a-lifetime events are taking place. And it reminds me, in my branch recently, we were having a discussion on world perspectives, and a comrade made the point that they saw a TikTok comment recently, which said something along the lines of, we are taught that 9/11 was an extraordinary, once-in-a-lifetime, horrific event that should never really happen again, an aberration. But what this person was describing in the comments was the fact that it feels as though events on the magnitude of 9/11 are continuing to happen again and again and again. The safety that the world was supposed to promise, in particular to the youth, to the new generation, no longer exists. And so I think actually the mood that exists amongst a lot of young people in particular is, what next? What am I going to wake up to tomorrow on the news of a massive event that has taken place, either all around the world or in my own country? And this is where we come in to explain what these events mean, why are they happening, and crucially, what can we do about it? You see, the capitalist system, it's like an old, dying, rotting tree. Underneath it is now this generation of people that are beginning to kick at it. They are beginning to shake it out of anger, out of rage. And every now and then, as it pushes things, some dead debris is falling out. Sometimes a politician or even a government is forced to fall. At the beginning of the year, we saw this in Indonesia. In February, you had tens of thousands of university students across the country take to the streets to protest the government's recent austerity measures. They named their movement Dark Indonesia in response to the government slogan of a golden Indonesia. That's not how they felt. That didn't relate to their lives. They put forward a series of demands also around free education, allowances for university lecturers, agrarian reforms, police reforms, and changes to the military. After almost a week of demonstrations, the Dark Indonesia movement retreated, or at least that appeared to be the case if you looked at the surface of things. During the movement and afterwards, the students had massive sympathy in the masses and in the working class. Now, we said at the time that students can act as a catalyst, as they often do, particularly in Indonesia, but they alone cannot defeat the government and its attacks against the workers. The working class must take the helm of the struggle and ultimately use its most powerful weapon. It must use strike action to deliver a mortal blow to the regime. 7 months later, a revolution erupted, and dissolve the parliament was the slogan. You had house after house of corrupt officials being targeted. The mansion of a particularly hated member of parliament from the National Democratic Party was attacked and looted. There were incredible live-streamed videos showing his luxury items being carried away, including a $600,000 luxury watch. And that particular politician, earlier on, with all of the arrogance of a despot, he had called demonstrators the stupidest people on earth for demanding the disbanding of Parliament. Well, clearly for him, the chickens came home to roost, and he was forced to flee to Singapore to escape the rage of the people. Now, we saw this happen again and again and again, particularly across Asia. Karl Marx once said how under capitalism, the accumulation of wealth at one pole is therefore at the same time accumulation of misery, agony of toil, slavery, ignorance, brutality, and mental degradation at the opposite pole. Nepal was then a textbook example of this process. Recently, I was on a university tour talking to students about why you should be a communist. And actually, at one of these meetings, there was an Indonesian international student, and she came into the meeting, and she was amazed also that we were able to have open, revolutionary meetings like we do here in Britain, which we are lucky to do. That doesn't exist as a right in other places around the world. And she said to me, I cannot believe what's happened in Nepal. She said, they've done in weeks what it took us months to achieve. And that is true. On the 4th of September in Nepal, the government banned 26 major social media platforms, and this struck a chord with young people who immediately came out to protest. That movement rapidly grew, moving beyond the question of online censorship, but to democracy and power itself in the country. Within 4 days of the initial ban, protesters had set fire to the federal parliament, the Supreme Court, the offices of political parties, and homes of senior officer politicians. The Prime Minister was forced to resign, along with a whole host of cabinet ministers. The army was evacuating politicians from their homes. After putting up with years of crushing poverty, the Nepalese youth had had enough, and they entered the stage of history. Trotsky said that a revolution is the forceful entrance of the masses into the realm of leadership, of rulership over their destiny. This is a powerful thing. This does not happen every day. I've never seen one, but they are happening more and more frequently. The Gen Z revolution is erupting on different fronts all over the world. This year, we have seen it partially or in full in Mongolia, in Kenya, Indonesia, Nepal, Morocco, Madagascar, Timor-Leste, and Peru. Now, we can't describe every single one. We don't have time for that. And actually, I think what's much more important than description is, in fact, explanation. Why are these events happening, and what can we do about it? The fact is, the gap between the rich and the poor today is the greatest it has ever been in history. And perhaps that explains how we have what seems to be the most arrogant and consequently stupid ruling class in history to accompany it. There's a famous moment, sorry, I skipped a bit. In every single one of these movements, the youth are burning with rage at corruption and grotesque displays of wealth. On social media, you have the children of the ruling class. They parade their luxury whilst the masses live in squalor. And this reminds me, of course, of a famous moment in history, which I'm sure you all have heard of. The story goes during the French Revolution, Marie Antoinette, she was told, the Queen of France, that her starving peasant subjects had no bread. And in response, she used those immortal words, well, let them eat cake. Now, historians, of course, would love to immediately correct us that that's not actually true. She didn't actually say that. And maybe some feminists would argue that you're being misogynistic or something or other. But whether she uttered those words or not does not matter. What matters is the fact that the ruling class, the monarchy, the aristocracy were totally oblivious and out of touch with the conditions of the masses, with the mood that was brewing in society at that time. That was the truth. And once a mood is strong enough, once the right conditions exist, anything can set it alight. There is something in the air, and in certain countries, fire is catching. Now, some people argue, oh, this is all because of social media, it's just brainwashing everyone. Now, obviously, social media plays a role. Social media is connecting us to many people all over the world. And I was thinking about this when you watch a TikTok video and you watch the first couple of seconds to see if you're interested and whether you want to keep watching it or not. And then I think if you are interested, one of the first things you do is then read the comments, because you want to know what other people are saying. What do they think about this? And more importantly, do they think the same thing that I do? And it's often in the comments then you get the real mood coming out of whatever the topic is that is being discussed. That is true. That is real. And we have to think about that today. This mood that is brewing in society is not the result of some agitators or a great algorithm on TikTok. It is the inevitable result of a system that is in crisis. It is the inevitable result of a generation. If you are 18 now, you have never known a stable world. You have never known a stable capitalism. I think the overwhelming mood in the youth when they look at their own ruling class is, how dare you? That anger and that mood has consequences. How else should we understand the phenomenal Palestine movement that erupted across Europe when the flotilla was interrupted, which seems like an accident that expressed this mood of anger, but an accident that expressed necessity. You had protests immediately erupt in Turkey, Belgium, Berlin, in Barcelona, Madrid, Paris. Now, the flotilla being intercepted wasn't a surprise to anyone. Israel has succeeded in only one thing in the last couple of years, in many cases, which is to destroy, in the eyes of millions of youth all over the world, any pretense of the rules-based democratic order or any lie or myth of what Zionism is or supposed to do. What they have done is expose the barbaric truth of what Zionism and specifically Western imperialism represents in the Middle East. So Israel's attack on the flotilla, it wasn't a surprise to anyone. Actually, I think what it felt like was a provocation. And it was a provocation that had to be answered by the workers and youth of Europe. And so they did. Again, the mood of these protests is, how dare you? How else do we explain 100,000 people coming out in Spain to stop the Israeli cyclist team being able to take part in a competition? How dare you pretend that everything is normal? We do not accept your world. We do not accept your war, your genocide, and we will intervene to stop it. We are discussing that this weekend. There's a specific session on Block Everything for Palestine, talking about what's taken place, the general strike that happened in Italy, a general strike, I mean, it's extraordinary, over what seems to be a secondary issue to the immediate needs and concerns of the workers in Italy. Why did that happen? Well, we've said it before, Palestine is expressing the deep disgust the working class and youth have towards their own governments. They have revealed, the ruling class, precisely who they are and what they stand for, that the genocide in Palestine is not an aberration of this system. It is, in fact, a reflection of this system at its core. It is a naked look at what this system, imperialism, represents. But the point is this, that mood in Italy, that mood in Spain, that mood even in Nepal and Indonesia, that mood exists in Britain as well. Tomorrow night, on Saturday evening, Rob will explain how this mood has come about in Britain and Starmer's role, particularly in accelerating it. And it's on that note, I dread to even mention it, but if you've been following the developments in your party, the party of, or the potential, I don't know if we can even call it a party at the moment, which today has had more people step back from the Independence Alliance MPs. Some of them have taken a step back. Of course, they've announced this on Twitter, which is the only platform these people seem to understand, resigning before it even starts. What an absolute criminal behavior and waste of the mood that exists in Britain today. Not just the mood, but the actual burning needs of the working class and young people in Britain today, given how deep the crisis of capitalism is. And we should compare it to our meeting, to our conference of over 1,000 communists who are dedicated to actually doing something about that crisis. So that is the purpose of this weekend, to equip ourselves with what we need. The complex relationship between the capitalist system's crisis and the political and social expression that has means that we need to understand philosophy. We need to understand how the world works. We need to understand dialectics, and there's a specific session on that as well, on philosophy and the birth of Marxism. You can attend that tomorrow afternoon. Now, as I said earlier, these Gen Z revolutions are taking place in different parts of the world, and it's not a coincidence that these uprisings have erupted, particularly in countries which are hyper-exploited by imperialism. But the flip side is that in the West now today, we are also seeing an anger and a rage. The Palestine movement reflects that. And perhaps the country which is furthest ahead in its polarization in particular is America, is the US. And Fred Weston will deal with this tomorrow morning in the session on Is America Heading for a Revolution? But we're not just discussing current events, we're also learning the lessons from the past. You'll find talks this weekend on Mao, you'll find talks on the Reformation, and of course 1917, how Lenin and the Bolsheviks and the workers in Russia actually took power. Now, in the video that we showed just before, it had a lot of Trump. Why is that? Well, Trump is almost the most concentrated expression of the contradiction that the ruling class finds itself in. And it is true, it's a fact. He is at the center of world politics. If we want to understand the world, we need to spend time understanding what is happening in America, and specifically Trump as well. One of the most important things is that capitalism is a global system. And that's why it's so important for us that we're about to have the analysis from Alan Woods. And it's so important that we are part of building a revolutionary communist international. Now, this weekend is not just an academic exercise. The purpose of it is not just to sit here and agree and think this sounds right. We are not just looking at the past, and we are not just looking at what's in front of us today. This weekend is also about building the subjective factor that is missing. I spoke about capitalism being this dying tree, and people are beginning to shake it. But to really get rid of it and the poison that it's producing in the world, it must be completely uprooted, deep underground. It must be pulled out of the earth. Comrades, the point of this weekend is not just to watch the Gen Z revolutions as they unfold and cheer from the sidelines and say, we support and we agree. It's to use what we learn to build a force that makes these revolutions successful, socialist, and victorious. Thank you. So we welcomed our international guests earlier, but just before Alan speaks, we want to give some time to a specific comrade. So I really want us to welcome Marcus from Sao Paulo. We think it's important that we give time, that he greets the conference and gives us an update on news on the new founding party that we have of the RCI in Brazil.
Bueno. Hola, camaradas.
Hi, comrades.
Bueno, la respuesta que la burguesía ha dado en todo el mundo a la revuelta justa de los jóvenes y trabajadores es la represión.
The response from the ruling class around the world to the justified revolt from the youth has been repression.
Ahora mismo en Brasil está pasando la COP30. Mientras tanto se recibe con los brazos abiertos los representantes de las agroindustriales y mineras con proyectos que destruirán la Amazonia.
Right now in Brazil we have COP30, which is welcoming with open arms the representatives of the big agro-industrial bosses, basically.
Los indígenas son tratados con brutalidad en el mismo evento.
These groups are set to destroy the Amazonian rainforest, and at the same time, the indigenous protesters have been crushed with repression.
Aquí en Inglaterra,
here in Britain,
no puedes decir que apoyas a la Palestinian Action.
You can't say you support Palestine Action.
Porque te tratarán como un terrorista y te meterán en la cárcel.
Because you'll be treated as a terrorist and you'll be sent to jail.
Pero la violencia policial no solucionará todos los problemas de la burguesía.
But repression will not fix the problems of the bourgeois.
Si en nombre de la mentirosa guerra a las drogas le llevó a cabo una masacre de 130 personas en el Río de Janeiro,
in the name of the war against drugs, there has been a massacre in Rio de Janeiro that has taken 130 lives.
Hace 2 semanas,
2 weeks ago.
Reforzando nuestras cifras de más de 40,000 muertes violentas cada año,
which represents an annual sum of 40,000 deaths at the hands of violence.
La respuesta de los jóvenes y de los trabajadores ha sido la organización política.
And the response from the youth has been to get organized.
La violencia,
Violence,
el desempleo,
unemployment.
la jornada laboral de 6 por 1.
¿Qué significa eso?
6 por 1 por días. Trabajas 6 días.
Working 6 days a week.
Y los ataques a los servicios públicos
And the attacks to the public sector
ha sido una fábrica de nuevos comunistas en Brasil.
has been a factory of new communists in Brazil.
Éramos 100 camaradas después de la decisión en Brasil.
We were 100 comrades after the split.
Tomamos este periódico
We published this paper.
y fuimos a hablar con los jóvenes.
And we set to ourselves the task of talking to the youth, which you can buy for £1, by the way.
Nuestro objetivo era de alcanzar 120 para el Congreso de ahora, finales de noviembre,
Our target was to reach 120 for the Congress at the end of November
y 130 hasta el final de este año.
and 130 by the end of the year.
Pero ahora mismo, antes del Congreso, ya somos más de 130.
But now, before the Congress, we're actually 130 already.
Camaradas, estamos muchísimo entusiasmados con la construcción de la sección brasileña,
Comrades, we're so excited about building the Brazilian section,
como de toda la internacional.
as with the rest of the international.
Y es por eso que estoy aquí, para hacer este saludo
And that's why I'm here,
a Revolution Festival.
doing the greetings at Revolution Festival.
Perdón, en nombre de la sección brasileña. Camaradas, espero que sea un buenísimo evento y que viva la construcción de la Internacional Comunista Revolucionaria.
On behalf of the Brazilian section, we hope this event is a success and long live the RCI.
Gracias.
Hello, comrades. I send you the warmest revolutionary greetings from the German section of the Revolutionary Communist International. Here in Germany, millions of young people are radicalizing over the question of Palestine and the complicity of German imperialism in the Israeli genocide. And also on issues like austerity and militarism. And this willingness of the youth to fight was expressed in the last election, where 4 million young people voted for Die Linke. But unfortunately, the reformist leadership of Die Linke is not prepared to show the youth any way forward on how they can organize and lead the struggle for the issues they want to fight for, because the reformist leadership of Die Linke rather offers their hand to the conservative government of Friedrich Merz. And so all these young people who want to fight first come into contact with the ideas of reformism in the universities and in Die Linke. And that is why we, as the Revolutionary Communist Party, set ourselves the task to fight against the ideas of reformism and offer a clear revolutionary program to the youth who want to fight and organize them in the German RCP. And for this reason, we will organize our own equivalent to the Revolution Festival, the Karl Marx seminar in the beginning of December, where we will explain the Marxist program on a number of pressing issues, like the question of militarism, Palestine, austerity, and so on, but also go into the breadth and depth of Marxist theory. We also carried these ideas into the universities at our semester campaign in the last weeks, where we got a total of 120 active contacts. And considering this, we are very optimistic that we can build a very strong revolutionary communist party in Germany that can challenge the reformist leaders and finally, this time, lead the German revolution to victory.
Comrades, greetings to all of you at RevFest from the United States, from the Revolutionary Communists of America. I'm here in New York City, which just elected a self-described democratic socialist for mayor. Exit polls said that 1 in 4 New Yorkers consider themselves a democratic socialist. Now, a year ago at RevFest, we were talking about Donald Trump's election. He won the popular vote, he won every swing state. All the major media outlets around the world were saying, America is shifting to the right. We said, that's not what's going on here. There is economic anger, it's widespread, it's deeply felt, it's aimed against the Democrats, and people are hoping for a change. MAGA is going to disappoint, and eventually the pendulum will swing to the left. A year ago this month, Trump was saying, we are days away from the best jobs, the biggest paychecks, and the brightest economic future this country has ever seen. Well, the reality is we are teetering on the brink of an economic catastrophe. There have been 1.1 million jobs lost, the lowest hiring since 2009, the highest amount of repossessions of cars since 2009. Retail layoffs have tripled. There have been mass layoffs across all kinds of industries. And so there's more economic pain, there's more anger than ever before. At the same time, the Democrats are just as hated as ever. 2/3 of the population views them unfavorably. So you put all this together, the fact is there's very favorable conditions for an era of mass communist politics opening up in this country. We have no time to lose preparing for it. That's what you're going to be doing at RevFest. That's what we're working on here in the belly of the beast. Onward, comrades.
Greetings for the Revolution Festival in London. All comrades in Pakistan are looking forward to a successful Revolution Festival and send their warmest greetings to all the comrades there. And you are doing a marvelous job building the forces to overthrow capitalism in Britain and bring a socialist revolution in this mother of capitalism. And for workers of all the world, this will be a huge victory and a huge step forward, and especially for workers in Pakistan and other former colonial countries and oppressed nations. This will be a huge victory from the yoke of imperialism as well, because British imperialism has a long history of brutal repression and crimes against humanity, and you are doing a marvelous job in fighting against this monster of British capitalism and imperialism and building the forces which will eventually overthrow this brutal and oppressive capitalist system from Britain. And this will be the start of a world socialist revolution. We are also here in Pakistan building the forces to overthrow capitalism in this part of the world, and not only in Pakistan but to undo the crimes of partition of subcontinent and carry forward the socialist revolution of Pakistan into other countries, to India, to Bangladesh and other whole region, and build a socialist federation of South Asia, which will eventually move forward towards world socialist revolution. Our fight is not two separate fights. It is one fight, one struggle, and for that we are members of one party, which is Revolutionary Communist International. Forward to socialist revolution in Britain, forward to world socialist revolution. Long live RCI, long live RCP in Britain, and long live RCP in Pakistan. Workers of the world, unite!
Hello. Now, we are very grateful to be here with Alan Woods, the leading theoretician of the Revolutionary Communist International and the author of many books that you can see on stage and you can buy from the bookshop that is just through that door. Some of the titles include Bolshevism, The Road to Revolution, The History of Philosophy, and he is the co-author of one of our latest titles, In Defense of Lenin. Alan will now speak for around an hour. Give it up for Alan Woods.
Can you hear me? What the hell is happening? Do you read the newspapers? Yes? No, I can't hear. Put your hands up. Hands up, all of you who read the newspapers. Oh, look at that, look at that. So some of us know how to read. That's a good start. That's a good start. Anyway, well, you know, I used to read the newspapers some time ago, but I stopped because I discovered it was having a bad effect on my health. Because newspapers imply that you're looking at the news. Actually, there's a big scandal taking place in Britain at the moment over the BBC. Donald Trump, our dear friend, you know, what do they call it? What relationship? Special. The special relationship. It's a very special relationship when one of the parties is just going to fine your leading broadcasting companies $1 billion for spreading slanders, for being one-sided. And of course, there's a big kerfuffle in Britain. All of a sudden, people jump to including left-wingers, jump to the defense of the BBC. Oh no, the BBC, our great BBC, we have never been biased. What do you mean it's never been biased? It's always been bloody biased. Always. What are you talking about? It's always been BBC has always been a faithful servant of the ruling class, and ever since Margaret Thatcher has been a faithful servant of whoever happens to be at number 10 Downing Street. So there's nothing new there whatsoever. In fact, the so-called news now is not news at all. It is propaganda. Now then, that's an interesting word, propaganda. Even in warfare, you get propaganda. As a matter of fact, propaganda has always played a role in warfare, even in the days of Julius Caesar. Did you know that? Yeah? Did you know that? You have his book, The Gallic Wars. You must have read that in school, surely. No, you don't do Latin anymore. There we are. How sad. You don't do Latin anymore. Anyway, yes, the Gallic Wars. It's not history, actually. It's a very interesting, very good book. I recommend you to read it. But it's propaganda. Propaganda to build up the figure of Julius Caesar. Very brilliant propaganda, very clever propaganda, written in a wonderful style and so on. You can't say that about the propaganda today, which is tedious rubbish. But anyway, propaganda always plays a role in warfare. However, with the Ukraine, I think it's the first time that I can remember in history that we're fighting a war through propaganda. Yes, it's a war, it's a PR war, in which the West, of course, is always winning because they've got very capable propagandists, very, very capable spinners, very capable PR, whose entire lives is devoted to what? To fooling and deceiving the public, to telling lies. Yes. Telling lies. Now, you know, what is occurring, it reminds me of another very, very brilliant man. He was a real bastard, but he was a brilliant bastard, you know, by the name of Joseph Goebbels. Have you heard of him, Joseph Goebbels? Yeah. Hitler's minister of propaganda, yes. He was a terrible, of course, fascist bastard, but he was a clever man, and he had a genius for propaganda. And what Goebbels said was this: if you're going to tell a lie, don't tell a little lie. Little lies are no use to anybody. No, that's no good. If you're going to tell a lie, make it a big lie, a huge lie, a grotesque and palpable lie, an absurd lie. And the more huge and the more palpable and the more ridiculous it is, the better. Because if you repeat it and repeat it and repeat it, then eventually people will believe it. And that works. It has worked in the case of Ukraine, where the Western public, the public in Great Britain, in France, in Italy, in the United States naturally, has been given an entirely false picture of that war from start to finish. An entirely false version of why the war started, who started, an unprovoked act of aggression by this monster Putin. Well, he might be a monster, he might not be a monster. Either way, it certainly was not an act of unprovoked aggression. It was a logical and inevitable response to the aggressive actions of NATO and American imperialism, which promised, when the Soviet Union collapsed, they promised faithfully that NATO would not advance further than Germany, would not go further east to Germany. They made this pledge. And the Russians foolishly accepted that. They disbanded the Warsaw Pact, which is their equivalent of NATO. NATO didn't disband, and they continued, despite everything, they continued systematically to advance from Germany to Poland to the Baltic states. They tried to get into Georgia. That was a big mistake. That was a step too far. By the way, as far as I understand, NATO means North Atlantic Treaty Organization. Yes, doesn't it? Does it? Yes. Yeah. What? Does it? Yes. I think we agree. It does. Now, is Georgia anywhere remotely near to the North Atlantic? Or any other sea? No, not really, not really. Or the Black Sea, that's what I tell the Black Sea. No, it's not. But it's next door to Russia, that's the point. The idea of planting NATO bases in a place like Georgia with the possibility, the probability of stationing nuclear weapons right next door to the Russians, they said, no. The Russians, look, ladies and gentlemen, that's a step too far. So they invaded, they soon squashed that. There was nothing. You think they'd learned their lesson? No, they didn't learn it. In 2008, I think it was, NATO actually offered, by the way, the Ukraine, be clear on this, when the Ukraine was established as a separate nation after the collapse of the Soviet Union, okay, it was, in its constitution, it was written, it was going to be neutral, you understand what neutral means, and it would not be a member of any particular pact of any sort, certainly not NATO. That's in the Constitution. Doesn't make any difference. 2008, I think it was in a conference in Munich, I think it was. The NATO gangsters got together and made Ukraine an offer. They invited them to apply to join NATO. Now, if that's not a blatant provocation, a slap in the face and a threat, direct threat to America, I don't know, to Russia rather, I don't know what is. And that inevitably would lead to war, and the Americans wanted war. Joseph Biden in particular wanted war with Russia at that stage. He didn't want to fight the war with American troops. That's not a good idea. But it could be fought by proxies, could be fought by Ukrainians. Let the Ukrainians do the fighting and dying. And then they believed this, and all the Western media chimed into this and repeated it. They were going to win the war. Yes, they were going to defeat the Russians because the Russians were useless. The Russian generals were hopeless. The Russians didn't have an advanced industry like us. The Russians didn't have sophisticated weapons like us. Didn't they, by God? You see what's happened in practice. But in any case, they believed this. And then they said, in any case, it won't come to that. We'll use sanctions. Now, sanctions are supposed to be a weapon of economics. Tariffs is the same word, tariff, sanctions. That's what Trump uses the two irrespective, the same. Sanctions. These are supposed to be weapons of protectionism, economic protectionism. They're not supposed to be used for military or strategic or political ends. But that's just what they've been doing. Slapping on huge, unprecedented sanctions against Russia, purely for military and political ends, as part of warfare. This is a very strange war. In effect, we have been at war with Russia for the last 3 or 4 years, in practice. In practice. The New York Times blurted it out in an article a few months ago, but it stated, American generals, NATO generals were behind the Ukrainian army. They were staffing the army, they were equipping it, not just financing it and arming it to the teeth, which they did, but also actually leading military operations. For example, the offensive was in 2023, I think it was, but which was defeated anyway. They organized that. It's in the New York Times. You don't have to accept my word for it. So we've been at war. Yes, but it's not declared. We are at war, but we're not supposed to be at war, if you can believe that. And that's put in the press. You read the newspapers, listen to television, listen to the radio all the time, day in, day out, the same propaganda. And by the way, we were winning the war. Make no mistake about it. You read the newspapers, the FT, the serious press, the Guardian in particular, the, what's the other one? The Telegraph, or the Tory graph as we used to call it. When I'm feeling like a laugh, I read the Daily Telegraph. Anyway, that's another story. But all the press, they were spinning the same story. Russia was being defeated, the Ukrainians were winning because of their heroism, their bravery, and of course, the game-changing weapons. Who'll see it? The Leopard tanks, the Abrams tanks, the Attackams missiles, the F-14, was it? I can't remember. All these, one after another, were supposed to be decisive, game-changing, sophisticated American weapons. Yeah. Every single one of those so-called weapons was defeated by the Russians, who have a superior, they've got a superior army, superior generals, superior strategy, superior tactics, and superior weapons. By the way, the Americans, in their wisdom, Trump actually, what's that? I can't read your damn writing. What's that? That can't be. Don't believe this man. Anyway, Trump withdrew America from an agreement to control the spread of nuclear weapons, a strategic arms agreement. He drove a coach and horse through it, and that's never been repaired. So there's no control over the. Now, you'd think the Russians would be terrified, but they're not. The Russians have weapons for which the West has no defense. You've probably never heard of them because they're not much advertised in the press. Things like the Oreshnik missile. Never heard of that? Hands up who knows what the Oreshnik missile is. Not many of you. The Oreshnik missile is a terrifying weapon the Russians have developed. It's very fast. It's a very fast missile. It cannot be detected by radar or any other means, and it has such an explosive impact equivalent to a nuclear weapon, but without the radiation. It'll blast. Even without a warhead, the impact is such that it would blast everything in the surrounding territory. That's one weapon, one little weapon, which they haven't properly used yet. Now, they will use if the Americans persist in their nonsense. They will use it. Another two little toys which they've got, which they just recently pronounced about a week ago. One is the Burevestnik. You never heard of that? Hands up for those who heard of Burevestnik? No? No takers of the Burevestnik? Well, what world are you living in, you guys? What world are you living in? The Burevestnik is a guided missile operated by a small nuclear reactor, which enables it to stay up in the sky, out of sight, beyond the range of radar and so on, for I don't know how long, days, maybe weeks, unobserved. And furthermore, it can be controlled. It's got a control panel which enables us to fire nuclear weapons at any target at any time without being noticed. Just imagine. And the best of all is the Poseidon. You heard of the Poseidon? There's a film actually called Poseidon, but nothing to do with that. That's rubbish. The Poseidon is a special submarine powered by a small nuclear reactor, capable of remaining below the surface, under the waters of the Arctic, the Atlantic, over there, for any length of time before it can. And it's got. I'll tell you what it can do. In the event of a war with America, they would literally drown every single city along the Atlantic seaboard. Every single one in a titanic tsunami, furthermore with radioactive water. Just imagine that. Nice. This is the world we live in. Billions and billions of money spent on these kind of things. But of course, the West don't talk about that. The fact of the matter is, ladies and gentlemen, the West, NATO, the Americans, the Europeans have been comprehensively defeated on the battlefield. Comprehensively defeated. Now, this would come as a surprise because if you read the media, it isn't the case. Even the other day, by the way, the Brits are particularly stupid in this regard, as usual. The other day I came across an article written by some British guy saying, the title of the article made me sit up and think, "The city where Putin shattered his teeth." The city where Putin shattered his teeth. I thought, what city is that? Pokrovsk. Pokrovsk. You might think that Pokrovsk was due to fall. No, not at all. Not only is not going to fall, but Putin's going to break his teeth on that, on the heroic resistance and so on. Well, I checked, I looked everywhere on the internet, and I couldn't find any dental appointments involving the Russian president anywhere. And furthermore, according to his photographs, his teeth seem to be in perfect working order to me. So there's some doubt about that, the veracity of that account. Now, what's the reality? Do you not know the reality? You wouldn't know because it's not reported on the press, the radio, the BBC, or anything else. Petrovsk has fallen. Petrovsk is now totally in Russian hands. And that's a decisive defeat of the Ukraine. Decisive defeat. Petrovsk was a key city. Syrsky and Zelensky, in a very irresponsible and very cruel strategy, were sending, that's why it took so long for Pokrovsk to fall, not because the Russians had a particular problem with it, but Syrsky and Zelensky, instead of telling their troops to withdraw, to save themselves, which they should have done, to save their forces, pull out of it, because that was being surrounded by the Russians. If you're being surrounded, you pull out, for God's sake, or you lose your troops, killed or captured. No. Zelensky has consistently had, and Syrsky, consistently held the lunatic position, no retreat, not 1 millimeter should be given up. You must defend Pokrovsk to the death. Unfortunately, the soldiers weren't very keen on that idea, for some reasons best known to themselves, and they've chosen to surrender. There's a lot of them have surrendered, or flee. They fled from the Russian advance. And Pokrovsk is now firmly in Russian hands. Now, the question is this. Propaganda might play a role, but you can't you cannot fight a war purely on the basis of propaganda and PR, which is what they've done. What the Ukrainians in particular have done, and what the Europeans and the Yanks have fallen in behind that barrage of false propaganda, fake news, if you like. They've repeated it and repeated it. It was all lies from start to finish. You see, the sad fact is this, comrades. Wars, if you know anything about wars, are not fought by words. They're fought with material things. Tanks, guns, artillery, missiles, drones, high explosives. Yeah, not words, not PR, not newspaper articles. No. And Abraham Lincoln said all that had to be said on that subject. You see, you can get away with a lie for some time, but not forever. Sooner or later, the lie, the propaganda is caught up by facts. And that is what's going to happen now. I think they're already, if you do read the papers, and you follow them closely, they're already beginning to edge towards a correction. Oh no, well, things are very difficult now in Pokrovsk, and the Russians seem to be advancing a bit faster. A bit faster, be buggered. Not just Pokrovsk will fall. I'll predict now within the next couple of days, before this meeting finishes, I think Kupiansk will fall. That's surrounded. And there are thousands of Ukrainian soldiers trapped in these places because Syrsky and Zelensky have not allowed them to retreat. They've been condemned to death, in other words, or condemned to be captured. Anyway, Abraham Lincoln said all that had to be said on that subject. He said in a famous quote, "You can fool some of the people all of the time, and all of the people some of the time, but you can't fool all of the people all of the time," as Mr. Trump has just found out, actually, to his cause, in the process of finding out. That's the position. And therefore, this is a turning point in the war in Ukraine. But I'll return to the question of the Ukraine later on. It's not the subject at this stage. At this stage, what I'm concentrating on is something that I think Fiona hinted at in a very good speech that she gave. That's the complete and absolute bankruptcy, the ideological, the mental, the intellectual bankruptcy of the leaders of the Western world, both in Europe and the United States. I mean, take Donald Trump as an example. There was a time, shortly after he was elected, when you might believe that Donald J. Trump actually had some kind of a plan. You know, he was working to some kind of a plan. You might have believed that. I don't think you can believe it anymore. This man has no plan. It's blatantly obvious. That's why he's constantly changing his position every 5 minutes, or 5 seconds, as the case might be. And why? Well, you know, he has no plan, and he's blindly stumbling from one improvisation to the next, without any clear idea where he's going. And that's no way to conduct foreign policy, by the way. It's no way to conduct any policy. But in any case, let's call a spade a shovel. I think Fiona made the necessary point. And this is the essential point that we have to understand here. You see, it's easy enough to say, oh no, all our problems are down to Donald Trump. They say that now. I think that's why they allowed the BBC to stage that monstrous falsification. It was a blatant falsification of this video. There's no doubt about it. They did that because the ruling class in Britain at that stage was hostile to Trump and didn't want him to win the election. They wanted Biden, or not Biden, but the other cow. What's her name? Kamala. I knew began with a K. Kamala, yeah, whatever her name is. Anyway, they wanted the Democrats to win, not the Republicans. So therefore, they went along with it. It was a deliberate thing. It was not. We made a mistake. It wasn't a mistake, and it was an act. It was a deliberate policy. They went along with it. Now, of course, it's difficult because he won, and he's threatened them with $1 billion court case. So they got to watch their step. What was I talking? You're interrupting me again. This is what? Yes. They're blaming Trump. They blame it under their breath. You see them to his face. They don't often face his face. They face another part of his anatomy. This part. The expert in that part, they spend half their time licking it and kissing it. All right, this is a family meeting. Let's keep things respectable, please. Let's be respectful. Let's say they spend all their time licking his boots. There we are. That's better, isn't it? I mean, have you noticed he doesn't often stick his tongue out in public, Starmer. If he did, you see, the colour would be black or dark brown. From excessive boot licking, you know. Anyway, so it's all Trump's fault. Look, he's buggering everything up. He's changing everything. He's all over the shop, which is true. It is true that he's extremely inconsistent, extremely changeable, and that itself is a factor in instability. Yes, of course, it is an additional factor in instability, but it's not the cause of instability. Oh no. The cause of instability is going to be look for elsewhere, not in subjective factors, not in mistakes, not in the conduct of any particular leader or government. It's got to be sought in deeper causes within society, within the economy, within the capitalist system itself. That's the point. And therefore, it's not a question of individual. The problem is this. All right, Trump made many mistakes. He's paying for that now, by the way. His economic, if you can call it an economic policy, this nonsense about tariffs and so on, which has landed in a disaster. America is now in a deep economic crisis. It's heading for a recession, if it's not in a recession already. I think it probably is. It was temporarily disguised by a bubble on the stock exchange, but that's precisely was just a bubble. Now they're heading, living standards are falling, prices are rising, rents are rising, people are finding it difficult to make ends meet and so on. And of course, the state itself is suffering from a huge deficit. The budget has just been, as you know, put on ice because they couldn't reach an agreement. Now they seem to be working something out eventually. But in any case, Trump's popularity has plummeted. Now, I'm speaking from memory. No doubt the comments will correct me, but I think I'm correct in saying that the current rate of approval of Donald Trump's economic policy is minus 34%. Okay? I think it's only about 30% of the population think that he's doing the right economic policy. 67% say he's not. That includes many supporters of Trump, by the way. There's a colossal discontent in the rank and file of the Trump movement, which is, by the way, it's a very heterogeneous movement, very contradictory movement. It isn't just a fascist movement as people make it. There are fascist elements in it, no doubt. And all kinds of religious lunatics and so on. But no, it's a bit, together with that, there's many ordinary working class Americans that have had a raw deal and are protesting against the establishment. That's the point. The reason why Trump succeeded is that he seemed to be against the establishment. He seemed to be presenting something new. And he seemed to offer something new, which of course has failed. And now, on the basis of the truth factor, of the bluff, the stories and so on, the fairy stories, clashing with reality, with hard, cold reality, his support is plummeting. His electoral base is therefore being eroded, and that's very serious from his point of view. But in any case, put it this way, even if it wasn't Donald Trump, even if America was ruled by a genius, it still wouldn't make any fundamental difference. Because the root cause of this instability and crisis is the crisis of the capitalist system itself. That's a fact. And it's because the capitalist system itself comes up against its own inherent contradictions, which, let us remind ourselves, what are the basic contradictions? Well, first of all, the contradiction with the development of the productive forces, on the one hand, private ownership of the means of production, that's number one. And secondly, the nation state, this barbarous relic of the nation, which Trump is particularly enamored with. He's a patriot, you know, the nation state, which is an anachronism. And it's a block on the development of the productive forces. There's no way around these contradictions, none whatsoever. And therefore, there's no way out. Now, the question, you see, if you ask me, what is the reason for capitalist crisis? Sometimes people ask me that question. I answer, you've asked me the wrong question. The question you ought to be asking yourself is not, why is capitalism in crisis? The question you ought to answer is, why is capitalism not always in crisis? You ever thought about that? Why isn't it always in crisis? Because it isn't always in crisis. You know, there are booms and slumps and so on. Now, you see, the reason is this. Capitalism does possess certain mechanisms whereby it can either avoid or delay a crisis. They can't avoid it, but they can delay a crisis, or they could make it a bit softer. They could soften it and so on. They could mollify it. Yeah. For example, in 2008, the banking system collapsed. The collapse of Lehman Brothers and so on. That was a massive crisis. Okay? How is it solved? They solved the crisis. How did they solve it? By massive intervention of the state, which, by the way, was not supposed to happen. I remind you. Have we got any economics students here? Anyone studying economics? Put your hands up. Let's see you. Who's studying economics? They're ashamed to admit it. I am not surprised. Never mind, put your hands down. Doesn't matter. If you're studying, you're wasting your time, by the way, because it's a sheer waste of time studying bourgeois economics. Read what the textbooks were saying for the last 30 years, 3 decades. What were they saying? The state must not intervene in the economy. You know, they made a big fuss. Oh, the Soviet Union collapsed because there was too much state intervention, not enough private enterprise, and so on. All this guff. Okay? Now, that was the mantra. State must not intervene in the economy. Leave the economy alone. Adam Smith, you laissez-faire, leave it alone. Leave us alone. The market will solve anything. You leave the market, and by its own magic, the market eventually will solve all problems. Well, what happened in 2008? What did they say? They said, well, the banks are bust. Okay, the banks will sort it out. The market will sort it out. Don't worry. Did they say that? They did not. George W. Bush immediately came with his checkbook open, with the government, with state public money in this wallet, you know, saying to the bankers, how much you want, guys? $1 billion, take $1 billion. $2 billion, take $2 billion. Take $10 million, take what you want. And they did. They bloody well did. They stuffed their accounts with this public money, money, by the way, which did not exist. Fictitious money. You know, now, what does this achieve? Well, temporarily, it did avoid the crisis, stabilize the crisis, and it enabled capitalism to survive. I remember at that time, there were bankers, American bankers, saying they were very worried that by the end of the year, they'd be strung up from a lamppost. It's a fact. Didn't happen. It didn't happen because they managed to get out thanks to the colossal injection of public funds, which according to their own economic theories should never have happened. And the only effect of that has been to create a massive deficit. Of course, for goodness sake. I mean, there's lots of students here, no doubt. If you're a student, you probably know one of the great pleasures in life is spending other people's money. It is. I distinctly remember. He's still pestering me, this man. You know, and it's very nice to spend money you haven't got. That wasn't Bush's money. It didn't come out of his bank account. It's public money. And therefore, because the money wasn't there, you get the accumulation of a colossal, massive debt, unprecedented debt, which is dragging America down. There's no answer to that. That was then repeated because they succeeded. That desperate measure, that insane measure, was repeated during the COVID thing. COVID crisis. That was a serious crisis. Again, they piled in with huge amounts of public money. The result you can see, look, open your eyes. If you look carefully enough at these newspapers you're supposed to be reading, look at the financial section, you will find the public debt in all countries now, with the possible exception of Germany, and that will not last, as I will point out, it's over 100% of GDP. Now, that never was the case in the past. It wasn't. In the past, say 20 years ago, 30 years ago, if a country was over 100% GDP in debt, well, it'd be a country like Greece. And everyone would say, oh, look at the Greeks, look at the Greeks. What a mess they made. But not Britain, good heavens above Britain. Rule Britannia. Perish the thought, you know. Or America, when you talk about America. America more than that. You must. Now they're all in the same boat, with the exception of Germany, and that's going to change. I'll predict now, within the next 6 months, the Germans will be over 100% also, the way that they're proceeding. So there we are. That's the position that they're in. And that, of course, has got consequences. That's got tremendous consequences. I mean, and by the way, Fiona mentioned the hopelessness of the leaders, the ignorance, the stupidity. It really is. I mean, it's amazing. There was a time when the bourgeoisie had capable strategists, capable economists even, I suppose, some of them, capable diplomats. People like Kissinger, you probably don't remember him. Kissinger, I remember him. Again, he's a right-winger, reactionary, say what you like. But he was a clever diplomat. He was a skilled, no two ways about that. He knew his onions. And he said, shortly before he died, looking at the leaders of Europe, he said, I've never seen such a bunch of idiots in my whole life, or words to that effect. Well, even today, now, if he compared them with them, he'd be pleased with the leaders he saw at that time. Absolute idiots. I mean, look, wherever you look, take Germany. Now, Germany, for example, Germany, traditionally, the German economy was the powerhouse of Europe. German industry, the powerful German industry, the car industry and so on, was driving the rest of Europe. Not anymore. Not anymore. German economy now is in a mess. They're teetering on the edge of a recession, if they're not already, they might already be in a recession. German industry has been ruined. Absolutely ruined. Factories are closing, left, right, and center. Even the Volkswagen, which is the crown jewels of German industry, they're closing factories and laying off workers. First time in living memory. German industry, why is it being ruined? That's the point. There was an article in the Financial Times recently, a long article, and the title of it was something like, "Can anyone provide a solution to the decline of German industry?" That was the title of it. They didn't give any answer to it, because they don't have an answer. I've got an answer. I'll tell you how to solve the problem very easily. For a start, you've got to say what the reason for the crisis is. There are several reasons, but there's one glaring reason, okay? Which the FT and all the other papers do not mention. It's like talking about some kind of unclean disease. You don't mention it in polite company. And that is the fact that as part of their war against Russia, the undeclared war of aggression against Russia, the sanctions and so on, they decided to break the relationship with Russian oil and gas, which was a plentiful and abundant supply, easy supply, of very cheap oil and very cheap gas. To Europe, above all to Germany. It was a lifeline to German industry, and Merkel, it was the basis. Once they cut that off, they deliberately cut it off themselves. Now they say, oh no, it's because of the Russians, it's because of the war in Ukraine. Nonsense. The Russians never cut off the oil or the gas. It was precisely the Europeans, the Americans, and the Ukrainians that cut off that. And therefore, they cut off the lifeblood. It was like a man that's receiving a life support system of blood transfusion, suddenly having the blood transfusion cut off, with the result of a catastrophic decline in investment, in profitability, and the mass closure of factories, and the ruin of German industry. That is the reason why Germany now, with the support of Merz, thinks it's a good thing. He's following Margaret Thatcher's policy, which is a disaster for Britain, of pushing Germany down the road of deindustrialization, which is fatal for Germany, fatal, which has always been based on industry and exports. And of course, with the result of that, living standards are falling in Germany. There's colossal discontent, a colossal seething discontent. What does Merz do? Oh, he's got an idea. Now, we'll spend a lot of money now, which he hasn't got. He hasn't got. It's true the German debt is not as high as other countries, but the way Merz is carrying on, they will do a program of rearmament. They're all talking about rearmament. Britain, Starmer, oh yeah, let's spend more money on arms. Okay. That will ruin Germany, totally. That's why they'll get over 100% of debt. And to cap it all, Merz and all the others now say, well, what we're going to do now is we're going to give more money to the Ukraine. More billions. He's just increased the amount of billions which Germany, which is in debt, is increasing its debt by sending further billions to the Ukraine, to the black hole of Ukraine. Starmer the same, which they never, these figures are never published in the press. The British public don't know about this at a time when they're cutting back on everything, cutting back on the national health, on pensions, on everything. And this man, Starmer, he goes, what's his solution? He invites Zelensky to London, gets him shown down Buckingham Palace, and he publicly hugs him. He gives a bear hug in front of the TV cameras. Okay? That, my friends, will probably go in the Guinness Book of Records as the most expensive bear hug in history. Because Mr. Zelensky does not go back empty-handed, you know. They're handing over billions. And this, of course, once it becomes known, and by the way, it will become known, and that's not the only thing that will become known. It now has emerged, apart from the military disaster, which I'll come to in a moment in Ukraine, there's a huge scandal involving corruption. Now, there's always been corruption in Ukraine. It's nothing new. People knew about this, but it was concealed. I'm talking here about billions of dollars and euros being siphoned off into the pockets of wealthy oligarchs and the supporters of Zelensky, including Zelensky himself. Of that, I've got the slightest doubt. They're all feathering their pockets, ready to get out as quick as possible, because they know that the war's lost. They're ready to get out. This money is going straight into their pockets. Now, it's a big scandal. For example, what they will tell you on the news, oh, look at the poor Ukrainians. They're shivering in the dark because there's no electricity because the Russians are bombing energy. Well, the Russians are bombing energy. That's too, it's part of warfare. They've got reasons for doing that. But in any case, that's not the whole story. There were supposed to have been measures in place to protect energy supplies against attacks, you know, air defense and so on. and also to repair the damage done, which is possible. We're talking about millions and millions and millions of euros and so on, sent to the Ukraine for that specific purpose. None of it was ever spent, not 1 cent. And the man responsible for that, was very close to Zelensky, has fled the country. And now they're forced to investigate it. And that's hitting the headlines in Ukraine. It's a big scandal in Ukraine. It isn't just that. The money's not reaching the front line. It's not reaching the soldiers. Defences that were supposed to be built have not been built. Trenches have not been dug. And so on. This is criminal. This is a massive criminal thing. And yet, of course, they're all, oh no, must support Ukraine, must say, let's send some more money to Zelensky. And people are but people don't know about this. When they do know about it, I think you'll find that there's an enormous scandal. And it will come back and it will bite them on their rear end. To come back to the Ukraine, just briefly, there's no point in going into details. The Russians are winning. They've been winning for quite some time now, for a long time. If you read what the press says, no, they're not winning. There's stalemate. Look, the advance, they're very slow. They can't even take a single big city, and so we'll see about that. We'll see about that. But in any case, these guys missed the point in time. They don't understand what the Russian strategy is. I pointed that out in an article I wrote a couple of years ago, shortly after the beginning of the war. And I quoted a man that you might or might not have heard of, Clausewitz. Hands up, all of you who've heard of Clausewitz. Ah, the intellectuals are with us. Clausewitz, the great Prussian military genius, who, by the way, had made a careful study of Hegel's writings, and therefore he knew about dialectics, which he applied to the science of warfare in his marvelous 3-volume masterpiece, which I have read, on war. Wonderful stuff. And in this book, he explains elementary things. Make a note of this. He said, the aim of war, the goal of war, is not the conquest of territory and cities, not at all. It is the destruction of the enemy forces. You destroy the enemy forces, they can't resist. They've lost. And that's just what the Russians have been doing. They've been engaged in the Donbass in a war of attrition, the purpose of which is not the conquest of cities, but the destruction of the Ukrainian forces, which they've succeeded in doing. Now the Ukrainian army now has been decimated. There's not much of it left, as a matter of fact. And they can't get recruits. The Russians have. The Russians got plenty of recruits, volunteers, plenty of them. No shortage of that. But the Ukrainians cannot. Why? Because people are fleeing the country. The young people, by the way, Zelensky is a real bastard. He's resorts to brutal methods. The idea, the heroic Ukrainians are flocking up to join the army. Well, they might have done initially, maybe in 2022. That I don't doubt that was the case. Not anymore. Not anymore. Now he's got to send out special shock troops to round up young kids off the discotheques and off the streets and bundle them into vans and off to the front, where they'll probably be killed, because that's the fate of most people that are sent to the front line now. Oh, yes. And the result is there's been an exodus in the last 2 months. Get a load of this. 100,000 young men from the Ukraine have left the country. They fled to Germany because the Germans are complaining about it. You know. So that's the real position. In other words, they can't, there's a long front, about 1,000-mile front. They can't possibly protect. The Russians have got a numerical advantage and an advantage in many other spheres, which I won't go into. Either way, take my word for it. Ukraine has lost the war, and Russia has won the war. It's only a matter of time now before they reach the Dnieper, and that will be the end of the business. I won't go into any details. But this is a catastrophe for the West. Trump, of course, had the... You remember what he said when he came to power? Oh, he said, I'll solve this war in Ukraine in 24 hours. Well, it's taken a little bit longer than that, I think. That's because the policy was, I won't go into details, the policy he was pursuing was completely erroneous, and it could not work. As for negotiations, now, well, you can forget negotiations. It's out. There'll be no negotiations. The war will be settled on the battlefield, as all wars. Wars are not settled by negotiations, actually, or diplomacy, or words, or propaganda. They're settled by fighting between actual forces on the battlefield. And there, the Russians are winning, as I say, hands down. That'll be a catastrophe. And then all this, of course, I haven't got time to deal with international relations. There's been a profound shift now in international relations. It's like a shift in the tectonic plates in geology, you know, which is usually accompanied by explosions. And that is taking place. Russia now is in a solid... By the purpose that Biden had initially was to separate Russia from China. He failed. The relations between Russia and China now are stronger than ever, and that's a big threat to the West. There's no way the West can stand up to Russia and China. Very powerful countries now. So anyway, let's move on a little bit from there. I mentioned that the tectonic plates, when they move, there are explosions, you know, volcanic eruptions, earthquakes, and so on. That's the same in politics, same in international relations. That is why at the present time, this global instability which I'm describing, which is the result of the impasse of capitalist system, that's the bottom line. This global instability has many reflections. It means actually, what it basically means is that the old period of semi-consensus, of semi-class peace is finished, and we're now entering decisively into a period of ferocious class struggle. A period of wars, you see that already, of revolutions, you see that also, and also counter-revolutions, don't forget that, especially where the factor of leadership is missing. And that's the position. There were two wars, actually, which affected the international situation. One is Ukraine, which I've dealt with. The other is Gaza. By the way, you've got to give it to Donald Trump. When it comes to PR, he takes some beating, doesn't he, you know? He was going to solve the Gaza problem and introduce a new era of peace and prosperity in which everyone would love each other and there'd be no more wars and everyone would be happy and peaceful and everything would be like apple pie and motherhood, you know, delightful. It didn't last long, did it? For a start, Netanyahu, who was a very wily politician and a poisonous snake, you know, he's developed maneuvering into a fine art. If there was a Nobel Prize for maneuvering, he would win it, no doubt, no doubt. And he's got no intention of ending the war. So he pretends to go along with Trump's request, and in reality violates them every minute. And Hamas, Trump says, you've got to disarm. Yes. Why have we got to disarm, Mr. Trump? We don't agree with that, you know. Hamas will not disarm. They can't disarm. That'll be like suicide. They can't do that. Be at the mercy of the Israelis? No. Therefore, that war is going to continue. And other wars will follow. Like with Iran, that's unfinished business. And Trump, I mean, like he's stumbling around, not satisfied with making a mess in the Ukraine and a bigger mess in Gaza. He's now threatening war against who? Against Venezuela and Colombia. Apparently they're not governments, they're drug cartels in disguise, if you can believe that. Incredible. He's sending the Navy. Now, I don't know, he's such an unpredictable character. The latest reports seem to indicate he might be changing his mind, but who could tell? He can't. I think Fiona said, one point I didn't quite agree with Fiona, or rather I questioned, but she said, we got to understand these people, you've got to understand Donald Trump. Fiona, we will speak about this afterwards. Seriously, are you telling me that you can understand Donald Trump? Well, you're a better man than I am. Yeah, I mean, to get inside the convoluted brain of that chap, it's that's beyond my skills anyway. But I mean, you can't tell what he's going to do. But he declares war, he wants to stir up trouble in South America. By the way, there's a certain logic in that. The real purpose of that is Trump wants to impose American complete domination in his hemisphere. It used to be known as the Monroe Doctrine when I was a young man. Trump wants to control everything, from Greenland and Canada, of course, the next state. Are any Canadians present? And hold your hand up, Canadian comrades. Stand up. Stand up. Stand up, be counted. Yeah, good, right, welcome. Welcome to the United States. He'll have you in the end, he'll have you in the end. Canada, and right down to territory. What's the lot? He's even threatened Mexico with military operation against the drug cartels. He could try. I wouldn't like to take on the Mexican drug cartels. It's like if there is a state within a state, that would be something. I'm not only satisfied with that, he goes and threatens military action against Nigeria on the grounds that they're not doing enough to protect the Christians. I think he's doing that to please his own Christian nutcases in his rank and file. That's probably, anyway, whatever his rationale, no matter what he does, and you can't predict it, it doesn't really matter. What it does, however, is this all expressions of the same instability. Now, there are certain consequences of this, you know. If you say A, you must say B, C, and D. And of course, for us, the most important thing in all this is nothing but I've mentioned. So I hope you've been listening, by the way, but if you haven't, start listening now. The most important thing from our point of view is the question of consciousness. I didn't mention Britain, by the way. That's a case in point. I mean, the by-election in Caerphilly in Wales, I'm a Welshman, as you know, an internationalist and a Welshman at the same time. And Caerphilly has been a solid Labour stronghold in South Wales for over 100 years. And the Labour Party vote was reduced to what is it, 11%? Catastrophe. The worst result in history. And the Tories were reduced to 2%, or just over 2% anyway. Catastrophe. And what's the result? What does Starmer do as a result? He goes to give Zelensky a bear hug in front of the TV cameras, as if that's going to help him in Caerphilly. You can imagine. But you see, this is an earthquake. It is. I mean, these results we saw in Britain, they're unprecedented in British history. And what this shows is a complete, rapid transformation of consciousness. And that's the main thing that you've got to go away from this meeting. We're in a period now where you can expect everywhere, whether it's in Canada or whether it's in Zambia or Chile or Brazil, anywhere, you can expect sudden and unexpected changes of consciousness into its opposite in 24 hours, like that. And we have to be prepared for that. Very often in the past, people will say, oh no, but not in Britain, oh no, but nothing ever happens of any interest in Britain. Oh no, Britain is quiet. Is it quiet? It's not quiet now, by any manner of means. And these sudden changes are implicit in the situation. Now, you see, I said earlier on that we're heading for a recession. When exactly that would take place, I don't know. I think it'll be sooner rather than later. It looks, all the symptoms are there. I won't go into details. The symptoms are clearly there. And but you see, the depth of that recession, we don't know. I personally think, because of this massive increase in that's the point you've got to understand. The ruling class now is facing a crisis, and they don't have the weapons to tackle it. They've used them up. That's the point I was trying to make earlier. They've used all their ammunition. Now, they've used all the instruments. With these huge debts, they can't get further into debt. Well, they can, but it would have disastrous costs. They'd end up with hyperinflation then, make things worse. So, you know, they've used up all their ammunition. They're facing, and they must be terrified. The serious strategists are terrified. They're terrified. And therefore, I think that the next slump is going to be a real humdinger. It's not ruled out. Don't quote me, because I'm not sure. You can't be sure about economic perspectives, ever. But my suspicion is, I wouldn't be surprised, put it that way, if it was something on the lines of 1929. which also happened suddenly, apparently without warning at the time, you know, so be prepared. But in any case, what I want to emphasize is this. This is the most important point. We don't need that. We communists do not need a catastrophe on the stock exchange. We don't need a deep slump. We don't need anything like that. Because the contradictions have already been developed quite well at the present time, as things are. You know, there's been a combination of circumstances. I won't repeat. You know what the position is. Actually, the living standards and the conditions of most people are becoming quite unbearable. Everywhere, including the United States. That explains the collapse of Trump's support. But you see, this is building up a colossal groundswell beneath the surface. You can't necessarily see it. You can't put your finger on it, but you know it's there. Beneath the apparent surface of calm, there's a seething mass. It's a bit like, you know, what happens in geology. The Earth's surface, I don't know if you know this, there's a proverb, you know, which goes, an English proverb, I don't know if it exists in other language, you know, as solid as the ground under my feet. You know that? You know that saying? Trouble is, the ground under your feet is not solid at all. It seems to be solid, but the layer of rock and earth which we stand upon is very thin in comparison to what lies underneath, the forces which lie underneath. You know how thin it is? I'll tell you. It's as thin as the skin of an apple. And underneath that very thin surface, which is holding these forces back, there's a seething mass of molten rock and developing under unimaginable temperatures and pressures, which is looking for a way out, searching for a way out, a weak point in the Earth's surface. And sooner or later, it will find that weak point and there'll be an explosion, a massive explosion. That's why the city of San Francisco, if you got a flat there, I would pull out now if I were you. That's a condensed, sooner or later it will happen. We don't know when. But you see, it's the same in society. There is this seething mass of discontent, of anger, of bitterness, above all of frustration. And the frustration is why? Because nobody's expressing this. None of them, these so-called politicians floating around in their little artificial world. The so-called practical politicians, yes, practical. All my life I've seen practical politicians telling me that I was utopian, that communism was utopian. Oh no, we're practical, we don't bother with that stuff. It's all utopian. It's all in the mind. Capitalism is here for good. Practical, yeah. These practical people who don't understand dialectics, and as Fiona said, that's the key. Don't understand dialectics. Therefore, they can't see these processes. They're blind. Only we see these processes. Now, Trotsky expressed it in a brilliant expression you might have heard. Wonderful, a wonderfully profound expression, which really tells you all you need to know. He referred to the molecular process of socialist revolution. Okay? The molecular process of socialist revolution. What does that mean? It means there's a process that is constantly taking place in the consciousness of the masses of slow, gradual changes. Okay? Slowly. Consciousness doesn't change automatically. It's not a quick thing. People are very reluctant to change, actually. That's the problem. They don't like change. They fear change. But gradually the idea, it begins to percolate the consciousness. And eventually that process reaches a critical point, as they say in physics, where you get the transformation of quantity into quality. And that happens suddenly. It doesn't happen gradually. It happens suddenly in an explosion. Okay? That's in physics, that's called a phase transition. There's a special department of physics dealing with phase transitions. That is and that's the process that's taken. That explains the Gen C, which Fiona dealt with earlier on. Suddenly, apparently like a bolt of lightning from a clear blue sky, without any explanation possible. You get these eruptions of young people occurring in such different places as Madagascar, Bangladesh, Nepal, and so on and so forth. Very different countries, by the way, very different conditions, but the process is the same. And I would say it's the same process that's taking place in Caerphilly in Wales, in Britain, in Spain, in Greece, in America, in Canada, you name it, in Brazil, everywhere. The same process is taking place. Now, therefore, comrades, this period we've had, this stormy period of class struggle we've entered into, that's tailor-made for our tendency. And by the way, let's be clear about this. I'll say it quite openly and honestly. Read my lips. As an international, this tendency can hold its head high. We can be proud of the fact that we and we alone, I stress that, we and we alone were capable of detecting these processes in advance and explaining in advance the processes which are now a fact, as against all the clever, practical people who can't see further than their own nose. Okay? That's the superiority of the Marxist method. That's the superiority of dialectics. Okay? That's the secret of our success. Now, just to refer back to this, Jensi, yes, it's a very inspiring thing, what Fiona said. Very inspiring movements, these heroic young people and so on. But, I think she mentioned the question that they must all be acting. What next? All right, they overthrow the government, they set fire to the government buildings. What next? What do we do now? To that question, unfortunately, and it's a tragedy, a terrible tragedy, they have no answer. Because there is no leadership, no revolution. The main thing which is missing in this situation, the only thing, yes, comrades, the only thing which is missing in this situation is precisely the Revolutionary Party and the revolutionary leadership, like the Bolshevik Party in 1917. You know, without the Bolshevik Party, the October Revolution would never have taken place. Moreover, without the presence of two men, Lenin and Trotsky, in that party, it would never have taken place. That's the colossal importance of the subjective factor. Now, I often hear it said, and it's true, that there's a vacuum on the left. That's true. I mean, actually, one of the expressions of this volatility is an enormous polarization between the classes, between left and right, and the elimination of the center in politics, in elections. You see the centers everywhere disintegrating, and there's a polarization between left and right beginning to take place. That's true. But there's a vacuum on the left. I mean, there was a time when there was powerful parties. They called themselves communist parties. They weren't really, but the Italian Communist Party, the French Communist Party. But these were obstacles in the path of the revolution. They've been swept aside by history, destroyed by history. They don't exist anymore. And therefore, from our point of view, that's a good thing. It means we don't have as many obstacles in our path as we had before, that I can remember. I was in France in 1968, during the biggest general strike in history. I could see the role played with the Communist Party. Same in Spain, after the death of Franco, but that's another discussion. I wrote a book about that, which I invite you to read. But in any case, the question is that without the party, without the leadership, very often or mostly these movements, no matter how heroic and so on, are doomed to defeat, ultimately. And that's happened tragically in every single case that's been mentioned here. And therefore, that's where we come in. Now, this business of vacuum exists. And as they say, nature abhors a vacuum. Vacuums must be filled. Now, I have said, I've been the first one to say this many times, yes, but with our present forces, we're really too weak, too small to fill this vacuum. Now, that's true relatively, but it's not an absolute truth. And some comments, I think, have interpreted it in too mechanical a way. Oh, we can't do this, we can't. For example, in Britain, oh, we can't because Jeremy Corbyn and his U party and so on. Jeremy Corbyn will undoubtedly set up a force and will undoubtedly get support. That's not where we're at. I don't think we should pay some attention to it, yes, but that's not where we're at. Now, the question is this. Can we fill the vacuum? No, we can't. However, we can and should begin to create a sufficient base that's sufficiently big and sufficiently strong to be able to intervene at a later date. I give you an example. In Italy in 1969, as Fred will remember, there were quite small ultra-left sects, we were non-existent, that managed to build up organizations of say, 10,000 or more. That's a sizable force. If only we had 10,000 at that time, I think. Of course, they wasted it with their ultra-left adventurist policies. They messed it up. However, if we can utilize that, that's the point. That's what we must do. And nothing else must stand in our way. Nothing must divert us. We don't change our course. Our course is correct because our ideas are correct, our analysis is correct, our perspectives are correct. And our methods, the methods which are derived from that analysis are also correct. Look at the marvelous, look at the presence in this hall today. The marvelous results of the Are You a Communist campaign. International. Tremendous, tremendous. But it's only the beginning. Mustn't be satisfied with this. You know. Now, the conditions are there. The objective conditions are there. They're ripe. They're overripe. This situation, comrades, is made for us and only for us. However, it depends on our ability, your ability. As an individual, you have a responsibility. Take it on your shoulders to build this organization. And if we can build, for example, like in Italy, an organization, say, of 10,000 people in Britain, not people, cadres, 10,000 revolutionary cadres in Britain, then we'd be in business. Then you can talk about intervening. Otherwise not. And we've started on that tack. We've already advanced with significant advances, not at all secondary, very significant advances, but it's only the beginning. Now I'll tell you something about myself. As you see, I'm rather an elderly gentleman now, advanced in years and so on. And I joined this organization in 1960. That's a long time ago. So I've spent all my life, all my adult life, in this organization. I've seen all sorts of situations, good, bad, and indifferent. But most of that time, people like myself and Rob and Fred and Anna, who unfortunately couldn't be here tonight for certain circumstances. She will be here tomorrow, I think. But in any case, we were fighting against the stream. The tide of history was against us. As a matter of fact, most of that time, as Ted Grant used to say, look, at that time, we could do nothing right, and the bourgeoisie could do nothing wrong. Now it's the other way around. Now it's the bourgeois that can't do anything right. I don't say that we can do nothing wrong, but certainly, so we can. We have made some mistakes, but they've been small mistakes. In general, our position has been correct, and therefore we base ourselves on, we do not change course. The tactics and strategy which we've worked out are the correct ones. And now, you see, for the first time that I can remember, the tide of history has turned and it's beginning to flow strongly in our direction. That's the answer, the direction of the socialist revolution. And whether or not that will be realized, that colossal potential which is there, whether that will be realized doesn't depend on accidental phenomena. It depends on us, on me, on you, on every single comrade in this room and every comrade up and down the country and in the world that's a member of the Revolutionary Communist International, to which alone the future belongs. Oh.